During these rather strange times, I just want to share some observations about our transition from face-to-face meetings to virtual meetings and how we can make this situation work for us. Now, this is going to be relevant for anyone who's involved in education and anyone who has to collaborate with other people, so pretty much anyone. The first thing we've got to remember is that we're all evolved from chimps, so those are the brains that we've still got. And our monkey brains evolved to avoid threat and respond to reward. So the way our brain responds to these things of threat and reward is with our emotions. And you can see this by taking away the E, and our emotions are the motions that make us do things. Now, as you can see, threat is a bigger response than reward, and typically our brains are about 5 times more sensitive to threat than they are to reward. So we really are programmed to avoid threat. And when we feel a threat, what happens is that our inner monkey brain responds. It shuts down all of our normal thought processes and switches us into fight, flight, or freeze mode. So that's when we clam up and act like a monkey. So the fact that we can cooperate at all is absolutely amazing once we start considering the myriad of interactions between all the different monkeys and the amount of complex analysis that has to be done to try and predict and understand what other people think. Now, this process uses the same bits of the brain that we used through evolution. To cooperate as part of a team, therefore, takes up a huge amount of our mental energy. And when it's going wrong, our brain treats it like a threat. It reacts as if we're being chased by a tiger and shuts down a lot of our capacity for logical thought and reverts into chimp mode. A neuroscientist called David Rock has come up with a model for how our brain is able to collaborate, and this is called the SCARF model. So this model identifies that there are 5 different domains that can trigger this threat-reward response in the brain. And if we're going to function as part of a team, as part of a tribe, we need to manage these 5 responses. The first response is S, status. Does someone feel like they have status in the group, or do they feel like their status is threatened? The second is certainty. Are you able to predict what's going to happen? Having that certainty makes you happy. Do you have autonomy? So this is the ability to make decisions and the ability to have influence over what happens. The next one is relatedness. Do you feel like you have a relationship with other members of your tribe? And the final one is F for fairness. So do you feel like you are being treated fairly? And importantly, do you feel like other members of the tribe are all being treated fairly? When we have our face-to-face meetings, 2 things are happening. Firstly, we're collaborating with other people. So that means that we're doing all of these things. We're assessing our status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness and fairness. And we're using our brains to work out where we are on that threat reward. But secondly, we're actually dealing with the question at hand. We're trying to either learn things or solve real problems and come up with solutions. When we suddenly can't meet face to face, some fairly dramatic things happen when we start considering this SCARF model. Our status might not be affected, but our certainty may well be very severely impacted, particularly if we're in a crisis type situation. Our autonomy, our ability to control what's going on, is likely to fall through the floor, triggering a threat response. Our relatedness is probably going to be triggering a threat response because we're going to have hardly any of it. And we might also feel like we're unfairly treated. So we can see that removing the face-to-face meeting is likely to be triggering a threat response on several elements of this SCARF model. And that means that our brain is going to be shutting down, going into fight, flight or freeze mode, and we're not going to be able to do a lot of intelligent thinking because we're back into chimp mode. So we need to work out what we can do to manage this model if we are denied the face-to-face access that we normally use for our happy scarf model, which enables us to collaborate and function. So we can remember that threats are triggered about 5 times as easily as rewards are triggered. So let's have a look at what that might look like. So we've got a whole load of triggers going off, and we need to get rid of those triggers and start filling in some positive reward in order to get our brain out of this chimp state. So let's think about some things we might be able to do. Considering each of these in turn, if we want to make sure that someone feels like they have status, it might be that we make extra effort to thank them when they do something. We praise people when they do something good, and crucially, we make reference to them in front of other people. That way they're raising their status. If you go, thank you for doing that, and telling other people how good it was. Next, we can have a look at certainty. How do we make people feel like they can predict what's going to happen? Well, it might be that you need to keep re-stressing, this is the vision, this is the long term where we're going. And also just providing reassurance that this is okay, it's okay to feel like this, and it's okay that we don't know exactly what's happening next, but the bigger picture we understand. Next, autonomy. How do you make people feel like they're in control? Well, a key thing is to delegate. And in a situation like the COVID lockdown, you may need to delegate far more than you would normally so that people feel like they are controlling something. And it's always worth giving people tasks, even if they're very small tasks that they can own, because that ownership will have a dramatic impact on their threat reward response and will give them better control of their brain. Next one's relatedness. Now this is going to be very hard if we're in a lockdown type situation, but we have to remember that there are lots of tools at our disposal. Personal phone calls, maybe text messages that aren't about work or just our reassurance, letting people know you're thinking about them. Also taking opportunities to put people into small groups. These could be breakout groups if you're using online forums, but anything where you can get people to talk to each other in small groups will be less intimidating and more personal than large groups. And try putting people into teams or pairing people up so they do actually engage on a personal basis. And the final one is fairness. So you need to stress fairness at all times, and crucially you need to explain why you're doing something so that people don't feel it's personal or it's unfair to them. Explaining the rationale will go a very long way to help. Maybe if you're in a business, being open book so that people understand the financial pressures, so that they can understand it's not that you're ripping them off. And also, if you're in a leadership type position, personal sacrifice will go a very long way. If people can see that you are also giving stuff up or working harder, then they're going to be far more tolerant of doing the same. So those are some ways that we can compensate for what we lose when we don't have our face-to-face meetings. But here's the amazing thing. Our face-to-face meetings might do this bit quite well, but they're not actually that good at doing this bit, working out solutions to problems, because we're using up so much effort just collaborating with all the other humans. So when we have virtual meetings, something really quite remarkable can happen. When we get humans together, what we're normally trying to do is create a network of brains and exchange information. And our monkey brains can get in the way of this because we're using up so much energy just learning to collaborate with the other chimps, the other monkeys in the system. And at a flash, we've suddenly completely changed the way that we're able to interact. For starters, we've got more brain power available. If you remember, when you're interacting with other human beings, a large portion of your brain is doing this threat-reward analysis, and it's used up to work out how to collaborate with all the other chimps. Suddenly, if you're in a virtual realm, a lot of that just disappears. That means we've got more brain power available to deal with the problem at hand, rather than worrying about all those social pressures of interaction. In any face-to-face meeting, there's a primate pecking order that completely determines who gets to control that meeting and who has influence. And all of this work is normally done before the meeting even starts, depending on age, gender, who holds the door as you go in, the seating plan, eye contact, maybe race. And there's myriad things that affect who gets to influence what that group does. Suddenly, in our virtual meeting room, most of those can disappear immediately, which means we could just be leaping into a completely egalitarian situation where ideas are judged on their merit instead of being judged primarily on who says them. Up until this point in our history, who was able to collaborate together was limited by proximity. Suddenly, with a virtual meeting, proximity is irrelevant. That means that our networks can be either much bigger or much more select in getting really appropriate people to collaborate together. Another absolutely remarkable thing that happens in a virtual meeting is that it changes the way we access information. If you listen to people talking in a bar and you saw inside their brains, what you'd see is that they're sort of listening, but mostly they're thinking about what they're going to say. And also, when you're engaging verbally, that exchange of information is linear. It's delivered at the speed of the person delivering, and there's one pass at which you can try and catch the information. If you compare that to the way someone reads, if you think of people reading in a library, they read at their own pace, they pick out the information, they can reread and accelerate and slow down depending on relevance or complexity. And also, they're not thinking about it to respond, they're actually internalising that information, processing it and filing it. So it's a much more powerful and very different way of engaging with information. Now, when we're using a virtual meeting space, we have both of these tools at our disposal immediately. We can exchange files, we can use chat boxes where we get people to input information in a text form. People can read that input from all the different people, and it takes away this need to respond that forces our brain to rehearse what we're going to say and instead think about the content. And the final absolutely astonishing thing that our virtual meetings do is they give us the ability to post-process, because we can record exactly what happens in the meeting, everything that is said, everything that's contributed, and we can then play that back later, slowly, without getting any of it wrong through memory or it being biased through meeting minutes. And if you think about the way you might respond when you dream about something, when you process information, think about it, categorise it, we can now do that for real with all of our online virtual meetings or teaching. So we've got this amazing power to put all of this into context. Now, any one of these would be a remarkable benefit to our ability to think and make decisions. So if we can do all of those, we might just be at an absolute turning point in our collective intelligence and the way that we are able to process information and make decisions. So, if you're struggling with the transition from face-to-face meetings to virtual meetings, you need to do a couple of things. Firstly, you need to be very aware of this scarf model, and you need to fill in those gaps. You need to look after people's brains so that they don't switch into chimp mode and lose their ability to think. And we've talked about ways that you can protect people's status, give them certainty, give them autonomy, increase relatedness, and ensure fairness. But you probably don't want to try and do that in the same virtual meetings that you're using for making decisions. You need to do this separately. And then when you go into this virtual meeting or teaching space, you need to embrace these possibilities. We've got more mental power. We can get rid of our biases, we can network around the whole world with the key people, we can access information far more effectively, and we can post-process. If we can do that, our ability to think and make decisions has just been completely turbocharged.